Hello, everyone. Hello. Welcome to this live broadcast here on the Scotch Porter Instagram page. Just waiting for our guest to join us here. Uh, Hello. Oh, let me see. And Ken, I think you can just DM us for that information. Oh, there he is. Hello, everyone, and welcome everyone to this SP Wellness moment here on the Scotch Porter Instagram page. I'm Don Champion, your host for this series. These broadcasts here on Instagram are a way of the Scotch Porter showing its commitment to really inspiring the progression of culture surrounding men of color and wellness. And today we have a really important conversation ahead for everyone. It's going to center on imposter syndrome. In a 2020 publication, the International Socioeconomics Laboratory wrote that imposter syndrome creates feelings of insecurity or self-doubt in people who suffer from it. There's so much to unpack here, and we have just the guy to help us do that. He's a psychotherapist, Stephen Lewis. You might have seen him in the recent Scotch Porter Wellness Edit video here on the Instagram page and on our Scotch Porter YouTube page as well. You've also seen him in publications including Oprah's own network. So Stephen, thank you so much for
Thanks
joining
for
us here
having me,
today.
Don.
We
Can you
appreciate
hear
it.
me fine? Am I coming in loud and clear?
Yeah, I can hear you. Perfect. And I should mention, everyone, we are, like our previous live broadcast, we will be taking your questions as well. So feel free to put them in the chat here. And Stephen, I hear you have a nickname of, I was doing some research today, the Edge Snatcher. I'll have to ask you about that a little
Oh
later.
boy, Melissa Fredericks, Mrs. Kev on stage strikes again.
You can't escape it. That's right. Well, just start us off a little bit. I guess just describe imposter syndrome, just
For
so
sure. So
more
if
for
people aren't
folks.
familiar with it, imposter syndrome is a condition, not kind of clinical in nature, meaning it's not like in the DSM or the kind of Bible for therapists and how we kind of classify mental health issues or disorders. But it does impact people. And what it does is it's people who are doing really well in life, they're accomplishing things, they're getting appropriate achievements and positive results and outcomes from all the hard work they're putting in their lives, but they have a difficult time connecting to that success. So they hold a view of themselves that prevent them from being able to really attach to the good things that they're putting out. And so they live in fear of being found out to be a fraud, that they aren't really in possession of the skills and abilities that have kind of elevated them to their status that they've attained in life.
Yeah. What started your passion for this
For
kind
sure.
of
So,
work?
oh
Have you
yeah,
done
yeah.
therapy
So I
before?
was, doing therapy traditional way. I was seeing couples and working with people. And then what happened is I started kind of taking an audit or the assessment of like all the clients that I felt like I was really doing some of my best work with, and that I really kind of connected with and felt really good about
Oh,
working with. And I started to kind of take a consensus of their histories and the commonalities that they kind of were presenting with, and did some research, and this is back in like 2017, and kind of found this thing, imposter syndrome. I didn't know it existed until then, that it had a name. I just knew from working with the clients that I was working with that they were having a similar experience, and it kind of, inspired me or intrigued me a bit.
and this is something that affects both genders. Talk about it specifically
Sure.
for men of
So
color.
way back when it was started, like in 1978, Drs. Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes found imposter phenomenon, what we know as imposter syndrome, and they kind of normed it on women who were in college and doing really well and kind of having that same, I guess, experience that we know what imposter syndrome to be. And so I think for like, men of color, men's particularly in of color, it's a thing of where they're in environments that aren't really affirming of who they are. And so sometimes being themselves does feel like and really is not okay. And so it's one of these things of where I'm not wanting people to internalize that and, kind of to define themselves, but to really push back against that and say like, hey, you know what, objectively, if I look at me being a black male in whatever spaces I inhabit, that I am okay. I'm doing really well and I can be proud of what I'm doing, even if others aren't kind of affirming that or praising it at the same rate that I would expect it to be.
Yeah. Someone just commented in the chat, this is a unique subject, as my understanding of imposter syndrome was a lot different. I have a hard time accepting how far I've come as enough. And he says that he's a genuine and sincere person, which I'm pretty sure
That's
you
really
hear
what
that a
it is.
lot.
And I think a lot of my work really focuses on people who, again, you and I would say you are crushing it. You are doing the thing. You should be supremely proud of yourself and confident in who you are. And there's this internal experience that they're having that prevents them from being able to do so. So the way I think of it is like, we have self-doubt. Self-doubt is appropriate, that when we're trying something new or we're entering into a new space or attaining a new level, then we would expect us to, because we haven't done it before and we don't know what we're doing, to have a little, tinge of self-doubt. Imposter syndrome doesn't leave after we've experienced or exhibited some mastery, and I think that's the issue, is that after you've been doing something for 6 months, a year, getting good outcomes for 2 years, 10 years, I think at that point we know you know what you're doing, right? But for people with imposter syndrome, that never really kind of connects, and they still feel like day one, like at some point someone's going to figure out that they don't have what it takes. And so, to the person that was kind of making the statement, like, I can understand that wholeheartedly.
Yeah. What are some
So
other symptoms of
some of
it?
the commonalities that I've kind of identified are people who kind of have a history of kind of being critiqued a bit by parents. I don't want to beat parents up. I think they were well-intentioned in what they were trying to do, make and shape and mold their kids to be the best that they could be, and healthy and whole adults, accomplishing great things. What happened from that critique is that the person kind of internalized and created or attained a perception of themselves that they don't know what they're doing. And so what you'll find is you'll see a lot of behaviors that are going above and beyond, behaviors that are rewarded in society, right? So someone who's staying late for work, someone who is putting in the extra hours, who is double, triple checking their work, and we're like, oh, that person's really diligent. They are really dialed in and they want to do an amazing job. True, the catalyst or the impetus for that is the idea that they're afraid or living in fear that someone is going to find out if they don't do these things to kind of maintain this fraud that they've kind of, presented to the world, this facade.
Yeah. And you have this concept of the inner bully.
Yeah.
Describe that.
So people might know it as the critical inner voice, or the inner critic. I call it the inner bully, and it really is a bully. It beats us up, and it's no different from if I got on here and I said, Don, you suck at everything you do. You're terrible. You've never done anything great. You're a horrible person. I don't like anything about you, right? That doesn't make you feel good. But you can also kind of brush that off because you're like, well, Stevon, you don't know me well, so shut up, get out of my face. But when it comes internally, we don't question that. And so I call it the inner bully because it wants to kind of make us feel terrible, feel horrible, not really be proud of ourselves. And it uses our insecurities, places where we don't feel really confident, to beat us up. And we don't question it because it's the feeling that we attach to. So my inner bully might say, Stevon, you suck as a therapist. And I'm like, gee, maybe I do. Like, none of my clients have really told me today that I was doing a really good job. Man, maybe they feel pity for me. And like, I'll just kind of go with that as opposed to kind of questioning, like, well, wait, where's the objective evidence to support that what you're telling me is true?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. As people of color, speaking
Mhm.
from the black experience, growing up, people always told us, you got to work twice as hard. You got to, how does that jive with imposter syndrome? Is that kind of
I
added
would
to this
agree.
problem, would you say? I mean, because it's the reality in
That's the
some
hard
ways,
part, right? Because the reality is that, as Black folk in America, we've had to go above and beyond. We've had to work twice as hard, 10 times as hard to get half as far. That's been a true experience. The problem is, and I think this is where the imposter syndrome comes in, is that we attach that to something about us, as opposed to kind of leaving that blame outward or externally in the world and the environment. That, if the rules are changed for me, if I'm playing in a basketball game and I'm the only one that has a different set of rules, I don't know that I should beat myself up and say I'm not really a good basketball player. If I had the same rules as everybody else, the three-point line was the same distance as everyone else, the free throw was the same distance as everyone else, then maybe my skills will match or be even better than the rest of the people playing the game. But if you extend mine out further, then you've made it more difficult for me to be successful. And that's not my fault. That's the world's
yeah.
fault.
That's a great point. Talk
Mhm.
about cures. I mean, not a cure, but how can you
Yeah.
combat this? What
This
do
is
you
this is
do
the
with your
stuff I love.
clients?
So one thing I try to get, and this is where the inner bully comes in, is I get people to kind of, one, be aware of their inner bully and name it, right? Because I don't want you to connect to that feeling or that inner voice that's talking to you and saying all the bad things, to give it a name outside of who you are, so that you know, oh, this is that person telling me this stuff, and that's not true. I'm really big on language, and so I really police people, especially when I'm working with them. Like, let's be aware of the adjectives we're using, how we're describing our work, and so I'm listening critically to hear if you're minimizing your accomplishments or dismissing compliments, or are you distancing yourself from what you've accomplished or the impact you've had on people. Those little things send a message to your brain that maybe what you've done or what you've accomplished isn't really connected to you, because you put a barrier between that. And I'm saying we've got to embrace that stuff if we really want to kind of get past what our inner bully is telling us on a daily basis.
Yeah. Personally, I work in tech at Amazon, and we talk about imposter syndrome openly a lot here. I see mine comes out like after a failure or a disappointment at work. How do you fight that? Like, what should you do if you're in that situation?
Mm-hmm. So the way I like to operate, and this is a common thing you're hitting on, for people that struggle with imposter syndrome, is that when something doesn't go well, a flood of negative emotions about the quality of who we are and attack our perception. And so the thing I'm trying to do is say, let's one, temper our expectations for ourselves. Let's introduce some compassion, some grace, to say that we can't be perfect. Perfection cannot be the standard. That we have to operate in a place that we have to factor in our definition of success, that everything will not go well. And that doesn't take away from the whole. And so not allowing people to kind of minimize or diminish the quality of their performance based on kind of the outcomes that they've achieved. So the way I speak about it is to say, I get people to focus on what was accomplished as opposed to how. If we get caught up in the how, then we really lose sight of the gravity or the grandiosity of like what we've done. And I think that's the thing that I really try to push people to focus on a whole lot.
Yeah. How does this show up outside of work as well?
I think, and people may argue me on this, so I'm here for all the smoke if necessary. But I think that imposter syndrome can impact us in a variety of spaces, right? I think that traditionally, kind of what the research suggests is it shows up in our workspaces or career, and that's kind of where it's been relegated. But I also believe that it can show up in spaces where we aren't used to being. So like, in our academics, that is a very critical environment, and it's very kind of dependent on comparison. And so what you have are, you have grades, you have these metrics, you have other students' majors and what they're accomplishing and awards and all these things that then we start to evaluate ourselves on. I think it can show up in relationships. And so we talk about, maybe some of the past traumas or our history in relationships, and if we've been in unhealthy ones or unsuccessful relationships. Are we internalizing that and saying that says something about us, as opposed to being a little bit more objective and factoring in all the things that can make a relationship go wrong and make a relationship go right?
I think one of the silver linings to the pandemic is like this normalization of like mental health and talking about mental health. Where do you see this fitting in with
I love this.
For men of color?
I love that like we're having more of a conversation about mental health and that we're normalizing it a whole lot. I love that imposter syndrome is kind of out in the forefront of the conversation as well, that we are saying, hey, there's this thing going on that is internal to people that doesn't need to be happening, right? That people are doing amazing things, and let's make you get securely attached to what you put out in the world, what you accomplish. I think that part of what happens, though, is that, and I guess a little bit of my fear is the weaponization of it, right? And so I think that, like, we are talking about it more, and I'm really all for, I think it's what Gen Z, who's kind of really pushing and saying, like, hey, do your work, hey, go get this mental health work, get this therapy. If you aren't working on yourself, then you're trash, you're not really doing what you need to do. I love that, right? Like, we are encouraging, we're normalizing the conversation. We're saying, hey, what, generations past, you didn't take access or advantage of this tool that is presented to all of us. I'm glad that's happening. I am concerned about the kind of weaponization of it, that are we tearing people down if they aren't at a place where they're ready to do that stuff? Are we really kind of getting on people for if they are struggling with something, whether it be depression or imposter syndrome or anxiety? How are we kind of still showing up as a community to be supportive while people, get to a space where they are ready to do that work?
Yeah. Someone asked a good question in the chat. Can it be passed on to other environments and friends and family?
That's one. I mean, I guess like yes, you can carry that with you. I see it as no different from if we're talking about our perception of ourselves. Wherever we show up, I think that we carry that with us. So if I don't think I'm good at doing one thing, then I think I'm more kind of exposed to or prone to think that maybe in another area I am likely to or more inclined to fail or not perform well. And again, it's not really based on evidence because that's the issue is that the outcomes are really good, but it's the ability to attach to those outcomes. So if I'm holding a perception of myself that is inaccurate, why wouldn't that also translate to other areas of my life?
There's a great point in the chat too. You guys are really on fire today. I love this. Someone said, as we are in a relationship with many people across the board, we do sometimes wear multiple masks to please a multitude of people. And he says, sadly, we sometimes wear one with ourselves as well. Kind of reminds me of that Maya Angelou poem, Mask. It's one of my favorites by her.
It is. I think that this is a human experience, right? Like we want to show up and present our best selves. I think that, part of the issue is when we're doing that, are we also kind of being okay with, and it's twofold. It's, part of us being strong enough to be okay with saying, hey, I am presenting me authentically and I'm trying to present the best version of myself. Also, that version won't be perfect because nobody on earth is perfect. And there's also kind of the society thing of where, we live in a society or a space where people are waiting to jump on, people for having flaws or for making missteps or mistakes. And it's, if the world isn't going to be compassionate towards you, then I think it's your responsibility to do that for yourself. And so I push people to say, like, if you aren't getting your needs met, then it's up to you to meet your own needs. And so, practice on yourself of being compassionate, showing yourself grace. That, again, like I said, updating your definition of yourself. I think we got to give ourselves space to grow and to level up at times and grow from our mistakes and learn from them, even if the world isn't doing that. And so, I try to use a ton of analogies. So it's like, if you're still operating from like an outdated, operating system of definition of who you are that was given to you or, was prescribed to you that isn't true for who you are today, then maybe you need to let that one go and update it to something that's new.
Yeah. I saw in one of your interviews, you mentioned an acknowledgement journal.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So earlier this year, I released an acknowledgement journal. It's a Silencing Your Inner Bully, an acknowledgement journal for imposter syndrome. And the goal for that was to kind of give people access that can't work with me directly because I'm only one person, so I can't kind of meet everybody all the time. There's only a certain number of hours in the day. But to have people to be able to walk through of what, if they were working with me one-on-one, here's some of the exercise or here's a collection of like some of the prompts or kind of questions or affirmations I might provide to you or have you do in our work together. And so I put it into a journal book that people can purchase from my website. It's in my, IG bio, and go there and hopefully, people will start to work through it. What I've been hearing though is that it's difficult. This work is hard. And so a lot of people will comment or DM me that they opened it and just as quickly closed it. So I guess I'm thinking about getting to a place of where maybe I kind of start one of these IG subscription communities and host some lives and, DM kind of discussions to help people kind of push past whatever barriers are preventing them from taking advantage of the journal.
Yeah. And this is not something that it's not going to solve itself in one day. You're not going to, you got to keep at it. And I remember I read a book recently, last year. It was Amazing Human Project. And the author, she talks about editing your thoughts. And I find myself like I really have to, like in those moments like of anxiety or when my imposter syndrome is coming in, and like I really have to hold myself accountable to like, what's the evidence behind this anxiety? Like, is it real or is that again that inner bully talking? And it's like you really have to hold yourself accountable and like.
Yeah. So Don, I am your fan. You are using all the language I love to hear. Kudos to you, sir. You are doing amazing. I love it. It's exactly that. It's editing our thoughts. It's, looking for the evidence, asking for the evidence to support that what we're thinking is true. Because the way the process works is that we're often kind of aware of the feeling first. And if the feeling's negative, then our go-to is to suggest that something negative must be happening. And I'm saying, well, maybe let's question that. let's make sure that that's accurate, that something negative
Yeah.
is actually happening. So I love the language you're using.
Yeah.
And you're absolutely correct. I tell people you have to be relentless. Like that's the number one thing in kind of trying to combat your imposter syndrome is you have to be relentless. There are no days off. Just because you get to a level, it doesn't kind of just disappear or go away. You aren't going to achieve your way out of imposter syndrome. In fact, I think that most of the people who struggle with it are kind of high performers, high achievers. And so by nature, they're going to continue to be in new spaces because they are leveling up, leveling up, leveling up. You're doing new things constantly. How do you ever get comfortable if you're always doing something new? Then you've got to know that, hey, as a body of work over time, I am good at what I do. Even if it's a new thing, I find ways to be successful.
Yeah. And I tell you, like, ever since since I've been really holding myself accountable to it, like, it really does help me in those moments of doubt. You know what I mean? But sometimes I do find myself kind of, is this really, there's
Yeah.
really no evidence of this, but it has helped me to like kind of fight my imposter syndrome a little bit as well. When would you say is a good time? When do you know you need help? Like, you're going to need a therapy or someone like you
Yeah,
to
so for
help
me,
with
I
this.
think like one of the things is for the way I kind of assess like when someone needs to get in, maybe get some extra support from someone outside of themselves, is if it's starting to impact your daily life or your daily functioning, right? Like that's kind of like the litmus test. So I think most therapists would agree that if your imposter syndrome or anxiety or depression or whatever is preventing you from doing things that you would normally seek out to do, or if you aren't taking promotions because you fear that you're going to be found out to be a fraud, that is impacting your daily function. You are moving away from and running from things that you would normally run towards because of this thing you're dealing with. And I'm saying, well, that's problematic, right? Because you're not being able to live your full life or live to your full potential. And that's not where I want you to be in life.
Yeah, yeah. And this is even more reason why you should unpack. Like, I went through a career trauma many years ago. I used to be in TV news. Like, I spoke
Yeah,
out about like some discrimination I faced, and like it ended my career, and now I reinvented myself. But like, I really had to go through therapy to like really get over that. But and as much as I did, but it still like manifests itself sometimes. Like getting over that trauma and not letting it like, add to my imposter syndrome. Any recommendations for people who are going
absolutely.
through that as well?
And thanks for sharing that. I love the fact that you're, kind of being transparent and real in this discussion too. Things like that do happen, right? So it makes it a little bit more difficult when we do have bad experiences or we do get bad outcomes. Again, the goal is to not internalize that it's about you, or that if it is something you've done, then from it. Because what we need to do, again, in factoring in our definition of success and being good and talented, is to factor in the idea that we won't always be on point, that things won't always transpire and go the way that we want. That if we're holding the universe to a standard of you must give me what I want because I put in the work, then we may be more disappointed than we ought to be in that case. And so like when things like that happen, my suggestion would be to learn from it. What was the experience? What did you contribute to that? What was done to you? How do you not internalize that to say something about yourself? And even kind of the language you use, I'm not going to police you or beat you up because I don't want you calling me an edge snatcher. But it's like a reinvention. It's more of an updating, I like to say, right? So it's like an evolution of who you are. I don't think that you had to start over because you still had all those skills, all those abilities that really, and all the talent that really got you to thrive in the one area, in kind of network news or what have you. And you will use and carry that stuff with you into this new space. And so you aren't kind of starting back over.
Yeah,
I use the analogy of like if you're trying to get to Disneyland and there's a roadblock, you don't go all the way back home, you take a detour. And so what happened with you is you had an
yeah,
experience, you achieved some success and you were doing really well. And for whatever reason, people didn't like that or wanted to try to prevent you from being able to do that. That says more about them, not you, but also what you did was say, okay, I'm going to pivot, and now you're still reaching success in another space. Does not take away from who you are and the greatness that is in you.
yeah. Uh, Last question. What would you say to men, especially, Black men, who, to get them to take this seriously? I think that, as a people, we tend to just shrug stuff off and like, I'll just get through it. We're used to persevering. What do you say to Black men to get them to take this
If I
seriously and
can give any
address it?
advice to Black men, it would be to open up and talk to people about it, right? I'm not saying you've got to immediately get into a therapist, but be honest with yourself and be honest with the people in your community. And I think as men, what we often do, and probably black men in particular, is, like you said, we tough it out. We man up, gut it out, don't complain about stuff because you can't change it. Just keep pushing forward, find ways around. And I'm like, yeah, we're going to do all that stuff, right? We're going to work hard. We're going to push past it. We aren't going to quit. We can also talk about how terrible, how trash it is, how difficult it might be on some days, and that doesn't take away whether you're, performing well or whether you kind of have the gumption to continue forward. We can talk about all of it. All of it makes up who you are. So just because you didn't talk about your experience doesn't mean that it's not happening. And what I find is that if you do share some stuff, then other people can normalize what you're going through so that you don't feel so isolated or kind of crazy in your own head about what's happening. Like, oh, this is my problem. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah. And there's definitely a normalization of this now,
Mm-hmm.
and I just love it. And really fascinated
Thank you.
by the work you do, really respect it. And tell folks
Sure. I'm
where
on
they can find you.
Instagram doing a bunch of stuff, and sometimes people don't like it, but I'm gonna do it anyway. I'm snatching edges on Instagram at Stevan Lewis MFT. I have none, so I'm good. Website is Stevan Lewis. My name. I try to make it real easy for people to find me, so I just use my government name. Yes.
Yeah, and your book is
Yes.
on
You
your
can
site as well.
access it there or on
Okay.
Amazon.com as well.
Okay. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Stevan. Really great conversation. And thanks for all the viewers as well, and your great comments and your great questions as well. And we'll see you again on the next SP Wellness Moment here on the Scotch
For sure.
IG.
Thanks,
Have a
Don.
great evening,
Have a good
everyone.
one. Bye.
Thanks, Stevan. All right. Bye-bye. You too.